GWR canopies are still in use on the railway today. Keep watching to find out how I made one for the Heritage Line station. Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome back to Donnington Castle Model Railway. And today I'm going to show you how I built some platform canopies for the Heritage Line station. Now, I was thinking about moving on to some other projects, but the time I spent researching the station building, I got to know Newbury Station very well. And I thought, while that was all fresh in my mind, I would have a go at making some platform canopies. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who takes the time to leave comments and to get in contact by email. It's great hearing about your own modelling experiences and your own layouts, and with some people how you've been inspired by the videos. That really gives me motivation to keep making them, so please do keep doing that. Obviously, if you think I'm doing terrible things, then also please leave a comment, because that's what helps me to learn and to develop as a modeler. So I look forward to seeing lots of comments about these platform canopies. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I need from the canopies here, and then we'll go through the design process and hopefully end up with something that looks good. I realise that talking in terms of requirements can make it feel a little bit like work, but at the same time I think it is good sometimes just to set out exactly what the reasons for doing something are to keep you on track. So I've got four main requirements for this project, and the first one is that I want the output to look good. So I want this to be authentic to the prototype, not necessarily completely accurate to it. I'm sure there'll be some concessions to that during the design process, but it's also got to look really good on the layout, and it's also got to fit in with the look of the station building that it's going to sit next to. And our second requirement is that I would like a modular design. So I'd like to make this in a way that I can make small sections, and those small sections can fit together to make a bigger model. And to do that, I'm going to create an end section, so the end of the canopy, and then middle sections. The idea being with two ends and a number of middle sections, we can then create runs of canopy of any length that we want. And I want this to be really easy to assemble and to paint, and so the design just needs to be mindful of that. And third on my list is that I'd like this to be as cheap as possible to make. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a job right now, so going out and spending lots of money on different products is really not something I can do. So if I can make use of the stock of wood that I've got and the stock of PLA for the 3D printer, if in fact I need to go down that route, then hopefully I can minimize the cost of making these. And then fourth on the list is reusability, and this sits hand in hand with the modular design. I need this canopy to fit with the width of my platform in the Heritage Line station and up against the existing building. But there are other areas on the layout that may need some canopies. But I'd like the modular design and the reusability to enable me to use these elsewhere, particularly on the main station area that I'll be getting to fairly shortly. And in terms of priority, I see each of these four items having equal weight. So now we understand what we need to achieve. Let's go on and look at a real-world example that we can copy to create the canopies. And those of you who are regular viewers of the channel will probably find it no surprise at all to see that we're going to be using Newbury Station. The reason being that these are, by and large, the existing canopies from the redesign of the station between 1906 and 1909. A few changes have occurred over that time, as we'll see, but they are mostly the same structure, and also will fit very nicely against the station building, which is also obviously modelled on Newbury. So let's take a look at the station, and the canopy you can see in this photo is double width, because where the car park is now, it used to be the bay platform for trains down to Eastleigh via Winchester. So that's the reason for the design being like this, but it's also replicated all the way along the station past the building itself. So this is going to be a good design to follow. And on the other side of the station, the canopies follow exactly the same pattern. In this case, they stretch from the main up platform across to what was the Lambourne bay platform. And if you're ever in Newbury and are interested, there are 2 remaining platform edging stones from that Lambourne day left. So that, and the canopy is really all that remains of that line at the station itself. Now, if we turn our attention to the inside, we can see we have glass panels and then all of this steel structure. Now, if I had a resin 3D printer, I might think about resin printing this because we'll be able to get far more fidelity on things like, for example, all these rivets. But the fact that I don't, and the fact that a lot of that steelwork is going to be underneath the canopy and not very visible, means that I'm going to adopt the approach of laser cutting the main structure. So we'll lose some of the finer detail, but I really want to capture the essence of the structure of this. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. So if we start down at the bottom, you'll see that we have these H-beams running vertically. They are sunk into the platform and run up to a point in the end of the canopy. Now, I have the option of potentially 3D printing those, but in this instance, I'm going to opt for some Plastruct. It's the Evergreen Models one that I'm thinking of, where I believe I can get about 60 centimeters of H-beam for about a £5. That's going to enable me to do hopefully the whole station with some left over. So I don't think that's too bad. And I think that will add some strength and rigidity to the structure, and then custom make the canopy itself to sit on top of that. So again, lending itself into that idea of the modular design. Very briefly about some of the features that we'd like to capture. So these cross struts and the 3 longitudinal, if that's the right word, beams. I want to get those. And then for the ends of the canopies, I'd like to get that very distinctive shaped wooden structure on the outside, and then that steel girder work which sits upon the top of each of the H-beams. So again, that's important. Along the edges, we can see I-beams. I'm not going to go into that much detail. What I'll probably do is just use the canopy edging as a way of creating an edge to my canopy, effectively rolling that distinctive canopy edging and the I-beam into one piece. Luckily, I have created this very distinctive GWR style canopy edging for Lambourne, so I've already got that in the locker, as it were. Another thing just to note is that where the canopy runs alongside the station, it is actually quite closely integrated into the fabric of the building. I'm not going to do that myself. I'm going to let one butt up against the other. Just need to be mindful of drain pipes and guttering. So I'm not going to add any guttering onto the side of the canopy that joins up with the station. I don't think that will look out of place with the way that will actually come together. On the running line end of the canopy, I am going to attempt to make some gutters myself from some styrene and probably some electrical cable for the downpipes from them. I might also include some downpipes which are integrated into those H-beams, but I'm not going to run excessive amounts of effectively the downpipes through the structure, as I just don't think you're going to see them, and I don't think it's going to add much. But we'll see all of that when we get into the design process. So because I'm going to use the laser cutter, I'm going to flip over now to Lightburn and see how we can start to design the canopy structure. Here we are in Lightburn, where I design most of these structures. And you can see, first of all, this is the back wall of the station building. This is going to fit up against. That gives me a good sense of scale for this. And then you can see a collection of pieces that I have made, or in the case of my platform edging, I've imported from that project. So let me talk you through what these pieces are. The most obvious one is this roof truss here. These are going to fit on top of every H-beam, so they're going to run down the canopy length. Then on each end, there is this end piece with the wooden planks and the edging style corrugation down the bottom. On top of that, I will fit a decoration piece, which will be cut in 1mm balsa wood, which is the pink. Anything in green is 2mm basswood, by the way. And then on the other side of this, on the inside, there's then going to be this piece, which matches some of the wood on the actual canopies at Newbury. But this is also going to serve another purpose. You see these slots and holes. These are going to have the ends of those transverse beams slot into them, which is going to make this nice and rigid. And these are our cross beams. But there's a slight problem with all of this. I based all of this off the size of the canopy at Lambourne. What I should really have done first is actually measure the width of the platform on my Heritage Line station. But not to worry, because reusability was one of the aims. So what I'm going to do is effectively resize all these pieces. These actually work really well for my platforms where there is effectively a running line on either side. So this is not wasted. I will keep this. But let's come back when I've resized all of these. And here we have everything that I'm going to use. So you'll spot all of these pieces I've replicated. I've just downsized them all. You'll notice these beams look a bit chunky. The reason is you need to remember that the laser beam itself has some width. If you go too thin on these, you will end up with effectively a pile of ash, as I've done in the past. So make them slightly chunkier when you're working at scales around about 1 millimeter in terms of thickness, and they will come out much, much thinner. What else have we got here? You can see our canopy edging. I've made this slightly shorter than in reality. So we're going to be able to fit a gutter on here, but whether we'll fit downpipes, I don't know. But this fits quite nicely with the overall scale of these for the width of the platform that I've got. These are the roof sections. These are the rectangles cut out for the window glass. And you will see here that we've also got an overlay in balsa wood to go on top of them to give them a bit more definition and structure. Glazing will go on the inside of these. And then on the modern version, there is metal guttering that runs in this section. If you look at old photographs, although it's not very clear, so I won't show you any, there is a corrugated effect to this. And so I assume that this was asbestos sheeting. Obviously, that's been removed. But to try and create that effect, what I could do is I know you can buy plastic sheeting of that effect. But to keep costs down and also to try something new, I'm going to try and replicate that with a laser cutter. So I've imported effectively a texture image that goes from light down to dark. The darker it is, the more intense the laser beam will be. And so by scanning backwards and forwards across this, we'll create hopefully this corrugated effect. It won't be as smooth as plastic because we're working in a natural material in wood, but hopefully that little bit of coarseness to it will replicate that look of asbestos sheeting, which does have that appearance to it. These are our longitudinal beams. These are copied directly from Lambourne, and then we can change the size of these just by adding more of these triangles and effectively pulling these out. You'll notice that there are two versions. These have this 1 millimeter tab on them because these are going to sit in these 2 millimeter trusses. That means that you effectively have this modular design so that 2 of these trusses and 1 of these central piece and 2 of these edge pieces fit together to form one section. Those can then fit with an end section. So we have our modularity that we were looking for. On the end sections, we have a longer tab sticking out here. That's because it's going to fit into our piece here. This will all become a bit clearer when you see this being assembled. But also that's going to give a gap between the truss and the end gable, which is mirrors reality. And I think that will look quite effective. Okay. couple of extra pieces to talk about. This is a wooden batten that's going to run alongside the station building, because I don't want platform, this canopy edging along there. These are tiny little pieces that the guttering is going to sit up against to make it easier to glue those on at the end. And then these H sections are for the H beams to sit into, just as a temporary measure, because I haven't created the final platform surface on the Heritage Line station. When I do that, I will cut these into it, so the canopy will then slot in and hopefully stand up on its own. But those are just for testing for now. So there we have it. That's all of the pieces. Developed very simply, just building up the shapes based off using my existing building as a size guide. And just copying the photographs using lines and rectangles, that sort of things. And from a few very simple shapes, you can build up quite effective model. So I'm going to cut that out in the laser cutter, and then we can start the assembly process. So I showed you those pieces I initially made at the same scale as the roof of Lambourne. This is what one of those end trusses looks like. It's a little bit too big for this instance, so I went over to the smaller version. Now, as the pieces come off the laser cutter, you can see they look quite fine. So they look quite incinerated and quite fragile, but in reality, they're actually quite strong. My view on this is that if they can stand assembly and painting, then they're more than strong enough. So the first step was just to add the two end trusses onto some of those longitudinal beams with the slots that I had made that fitted together quite nicely, glue that together with rocket card glue. And then the next pieces to go in are those other support beams. These were actually quite fiddly because you have to put them in one side at a time and then glue them in the middle. I mean, it was not easy to necessarily line them up well. So, I mean, that's fine for me to do. If I can think of a better way of doing that, then I certainly will do. And then you can see where I've put that spacer piece on the end. And just a quick note on painting, I'm using Precision Paints, GWR, Stone, Dot, and Light. And then when you paint up the frame, and I'm doing that in dark stone, this is what you get. Some people suggest pre-treating laser cut wood, and there are some products for doing that, or you can use a watered down PVA. I've never found that really necessary. That might be because I work primarily in enamels. What I find is if you put a fairly thick first coat on and then let it completely dry, then it seals the wood quite nicely by itself. And I'm always under the assumption that you're going to need two coats anyway. So that seems to work for me. Other people will say that you need to seal it. As I said, I've not had any problems. And then once we've got our ends, we can then see how those middle pieces are going to fit in to give us that modular design. And the edging will go on like that. Here we go with a bunch more of those pieces, and you can see how those are also painted in light and dark stone. Then fitting that end piece on, you can see where the spacers give it a slight gap between that end truss, which I think looks really cool. Also matches the original. So that's starting to look really good. You can see all of that truss work coming together now. And this is all of those beams assembled and the ends put on, with all of that painted. So that is quite a solid structure. So I was really pleased with that. And we're ready now for the roofs to go on. So this is the first time I tried making corrugations. So I did a few tests. I initially got the power way too low and too quick, and then went the other way and then burnt holes straight through it, and then eventually found a good technique for doing that. You can hopefully see the corrugations there. And here we have three pieces that have been cut with that. And I think that gives a really nice effect, and also that slightly rough texture I talked about earlier. Next, I'm going to paint these up, and this is my go-to color. I think it's called Mouse Grey. You get this from Hobbycraft in the UK. It's just an acrylic paint in this case, and I find that one coat gets a really good coverage on that. And here we have the roofs in the middle of the painting process. So you can see I'm just putting a coat of grey over those. That's just one coat. So with a second coat, that'll be absolutely fine. And there's one on the other side. Again, a really thick layer of even the acrylic paint. Let that dry, and then a second coat, and we're all good to go. So next I fit window glazing. So again, gluing glaze for that. And I just used the packaging from another kit to do that. I've gone a bit heavy on the glue around there. So a little bit has leaked out onto the panels themselves. But we can hopefully cover that up with a bit of weathering later on. And that's all 6 of the roof sections. You'll just spot on a couple of those pieces the little notch. That notch is where the canopy will fit up against the building. Next job, once the glue had dried, it was just to go over that with some really fine wet and dry, just to give a frosted appearance to the window panes, which is how you'll find them in reality. So that effect looks quite good. I don't know what grade that wet and dry is because it's very old and in small pieces. I know the grade ends in a 0, that's it. And there is the roof with the window panels fixed in place, and you can see the first of the edging strips have been put in place, and those little blocks I talked about, which is where the guttering is going to sit on. It looks a little bit wonky from this angle, but that's because those sections didn't glue down 100%, so I do go back in there and glue those down, and once they're in position it looks a lot better. And there you can see how that edging strip is stuck on. It's stuck to both the roof section and onto those cross beams and trusses. And every piece that you put on gives this a more rigid feel, which is really good. Now it's time to start fitting the H-beams. I cut that to the length that I needed. I then masked up the ends because those were going to be dark stone to blend in with trusses. And you can see the light stone painting on those. I also cut my gutters to the right size and then just stuck a little bit of plastic on the end. When that dried, I trimmed around that just to give an end to the gutter. Because obviously with the styrene strip, you don't get any ends on that. And then this is those H-beams all painted up with dark stone, and they're also been put into those bases I mentioned, which are hopefully just a temporary solution to enable me to stand this up. And then this is those slots in the trusses where those H-beams are going to be glued, and all of our edging is now on, so we're ready for those H-beams to go in. I'll talk about the weathering to the roof in a second. And there we have them glued in place and ready for some final weathering. I don't feel I'm particularly good at weathering, so I don't want to spend much time talking about something that I don't feel like I'm an expert on. But in essence, there were 3 techniques I used on the platform canopy. One was some black wash, one was some wash over the glazing, and the other was some weathering powders. If we look back at Newbury, we can see that glass is quite dirty, and this is a well-maintained station. But the station on the layout here has really been abandoned for over 10 years, so I want to try and get quite a grimy look to those panels. So I've used some Humbrol dark green wash and a little bit of black wash. It keys into where I use the wet and dry quite well, and I'm not overly happy with it, but I think it's good enough for now. So our canopy is ready. This is a reminder of what the one at Newbury looks like, and here is what is now on the layout. So if I flick back to Newbury and then back to this one, I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. If we think back to our 4 key points, 1, does it look good? Well, I'm pretty happy with this. I think this is going to bring the station together really nicely. Is it modular? Well, yes, I can make long runs of this now. I've even got some ideas about how to add a T section in to take the canopy off in a different direction. Reusability is also good because I've already made a different size of this that I can use elsewhere on the layout if needed. And cheap, yes, it certainly was, all designed by me using existing materials, a couple of bits of styrene, but I've got plenty of that now if I'm going to make other ones. So I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out. I think it will look better once the station is in better shape. Even though the surface you can see there has been painted grey, that's not the top platform surface. So I need to figure out how that's going to work, and then I can start getting all this stuff bedded in a bit better. But I'm really pleased with the progress that I've been making. And as you can see, those platform canopies and the station building need a little bit of bedding in, and I'll continue to do that, particularly as I work on the platform surface itself. That will help to get things looking a little bit better over there. But I'm probably going to move on from that area for now and focus on some other areas of the layout, maybe get into some scenic modelling of some areas that need a little bit of work. But just reflecting on the build here, these canopies were quite complex for me, particularly starting out with the photographs and thinking about how I was going to construct them. But I feel like I was able to do that because of the progress I've made and the learning I've done. My first laser cut project was something as simple as a fence post. Then I started making some very small buildings, worked my way up to bigger buildings, and now into something a little bit more complex. And so that's all self-taught, that's all experimentation. I think that's a great advert for what you can do when you push yourself to develop your own skills and to try new things. So I'm really pleased, and we'll see what other projects I can do with the laser cutter at some point in the future. Thank you very much for watching. If you do have any feedback, please do leave that in the comments below. It's always great to hear about things that I've done well, but also things maybe I could do better next time. That helps me as a modeler, and that certainly helps me to make the best layout I possibly can here. So I do read all the comments, and I make every effort to respond to everyone that I get sent. So please do consider doing that. Now, if you're not a subscriber, there'll be a button coming up for you to do that. And I will see you on another video very soon with hopefully something else exciting on the layout. But for now, bye-bye.